Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Reside Podcast. I'm your host, Laura Munoz, CEO of the experience agency D Flash. Each week, I bring a different business leader who's doing some game-changing work. And as we are now navigating 6, 7, 11 months into this time of being inside, it's fascinating to keep talking to such amazing business leaders who continue to pivot, grow, and do phenomenal work at this particular moment. We're actually recording this episode in October. And so, this is a really important time of the year where I think it's going to be great to have this conversation with Laurel Rossi, who's the co-founder of Creative Spirit. She's going to talk about how she got to where she is, some of her amazing projects that she works on, and how she actually got there. It's going to be a fascinating conversation. Take a listen. Hey, Laurel, great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me. Thanks so much, Laura.
Likewise. Well, we're still inside. We will be for another year and a half, but the podcast does not change. And the first question definitely does not change. So Laurel, what was your first job?
My first job was a camp counselor. And I know professionally that there is some connection between that opportunity to be around lots of people all the time and really corralling lots of different points of view and what I do today. My first professional job was at an advertising agency, and that hasn't changed much today. I'm still in advertising. But that first opportunity, that first foray into the marketing world really gave me a chance to do what I love to do best, which is to hear lots and lots of opinions, gather the diversity of thought, and put it into action in terms of taking people on a journey to their economic, landing place. And then it was really about, understanding business. And today, my vision for my own career and my family's future is really about economic justice.
Oh, this is why I was so psyched to talk to you. So many things, which we'll get to. So, it's funny, it is fascinating to me, 4 years and change into doing this podcast, and every single guest who's come on the show asks the same question to about what their first job is. And it's fascinating how people who are camp counselors, babysitters, peer educators, they always end up in some sort of marketing-esque career where they're helping to communicate to communities who oftentimes don't have a voice. And it's just, it's a really incredible correlation with that first job and how that impacts you and how you see things and how you interact with people and how that resonates with you throughout your career and affects a lot of the choices that you make. So it's always so fascinating to hear what people do when the first job they ever mention whenever I ask that question.
I'm not surprised that you're saying that. I do think if you have any kind of a love of humanistics and any kind of a love for anthropology and any kind of a love of people, marketing is the place. It's sort of the centerpiece for a lot of that. And, when I grew up in a very diverse environment, not diverse ethnically necessarily, white, very white, Italian, but socioeconomically a very diverse background. I grew up in Park Slope in Brooklyn. It's a place that today one can barely afford to live in. However, at the time, it was, pre-gentrification, and it was a really great experiment to be able to understand how people in different phases of immigration, different phases of success, et cetera, could come together and make a community. And I'll always be grateful for that time because I think it gave me my interest in people and my interest in economic justice.
Awesome. So good. So going from camp counselor to being the big boss lady that you are right now, I don't think that was a simple path. So it'd be lovely if you kind of share with us, how did you get to be where you are right now?
I think the long road, the longer journey that I've been on is really a journey to understand how to balance what is, the American dream, if you will, with what the new American dream is. And the reason I say that is, on a path to social justice and on a path to economic justice, you can't help but be tempted by taking an expeditious route. You can't be, it's very hard not to be tempted by a measure that is just about success. And so, I stayed in the agency business for a while. I was really curious about what it would mean to be on the client side of the business, as we say in advertising, and was a brand manager for a really long time. And I think the biggest pivot in my career wasn't the switch from the agency side to the client side, working on Procter & Gamble, where I had lots of exposure to lots of different audiences, et cetera. But it was when I picked up and moved from New York to Massachusetts, not very far, by the way. But I took a job as the CMO of a company that was just about to go public. And it was really fascinating because it gave me an opportunity and I think I was all of 31 years old. It gave me an opportunity to really talk to a very senior group of folks, the board at 31 years old, and tell them that they'd actually positioned the company in a not so advantageous way for the market. And so what they had wanted to do was to position the company in a very big market in the apparel field. And what I really saw was a services company. And that one opportunity in my career at 31 years old to take a company called Cirque public and be the spokesperson and be confident about what I knew about the marketplace and also about the people on the other end of the sale, if you will, was what really was the pivotal moment in my career, because I think it gave me confidence I didn't have before. It had all kinds of really great training and really great, smart people that I reported to. I worked at Citibank as a brand manager right before that. And so I think the independence and I was the CMO of a relatively small company. It was $25 million at the time, which we grew to $1 billion and took public and did 2 follow-on offerings. But I think that opportunity that crew gave me really changed my life.
Wow. And, after you do that at such a young age, like, most people, could drop the mic and and take their ball and go home. Like, what kept you moving after that?
Well, interestingly enough, what sort of halted the momentum was another interesting learning in terms of how groups work together and how important chemistry is and how important it is to have a vision, because that C team, that executive team, ultimately fell apart. And so the 2 most senior folks, the CEO and the president, had a huge falling out. And there was a really big rift on the board in terms of what direction to take the company. So we had decided we'd been very successful with the initial public offering, 2 follow-on offerings, and then the next place to go was, where were we going to find more growth? I mean, we'd experienced 20% growth year over year for 6-7 years. And then all of a sudden, what were we going to do next? And so that rift among people who thought very conventionally, in my opinion, really changed the trajectory, not only of what I would do next, but it also gave me a great lesson learned in terms of what it really takes to be a leader and what it really takes to create a team. And so ultimately the company sort of broke apart. We did an acquisition that was very contentious, and they decided to sort of break up the company into a bunch of parts. And I decided to leave when the CEO left. He resigned, and then I resigned very shortly thereafter to go to I went to Interpublic, and I decided that I would take that leadership opportunity and all my learning and go back into a more conventional environment and try to lead it inside of the advertising community, and went to Hill Holiday.
Wow. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So you're doing all this really amazing work and you're kind of getting there. What prompts you to become the co-founder of Creative Spirit? Because you could kind of do anything you want.
I don't know. Thank you. I appreciate the compliment. I would say that, my experience back in the advertising business and understanding, how important it is to set a vision and then bring people along in that vision, kind of started me down the road of getting back to my true passion, which is social justice, economic justice. How do I take business and success and turn that into something that is working for the greater good? How do we share? How do we take that, insurance model, if you will, that says, if we collect from the collective smarty pants folks and expand that to folks who really need a little bit more in their own lives, I think that we have an opportunity to really be able to share the wealth. And so at Interpublic, there was something called the Women's Leadership Network that a woman named Pam Larrick was just starting, and she was asking for folks around the organization to pull together and really focus on how we could start pulling the next generation of women forward. And so at the time, and I think it's a little bit better now, 75% of women at the bottom, 10% at the top. And that Women's Leadership Network really changed the trajectory in what is a huge organization around being able to bring women to the fore. And once I had a taste of the fact that I could actually have an impact on a group of folks in terms of their own opportunity, it became obvious to me that I would make the connection in my own personal life in terms of how I could help others and use that model going forward. So Women's Leadership Network at Interpublic, we did a women's master class, what we call the master class at the Advertising Club of New York, where I'm on the board and have been on the board for a long time, which not only advantaged women, but women of color in particular who drop out in the middle levels. And then I had a baby. And my daughter, Mia, was born with a rare disease called Williams syndrome. And Williams syndrome is one of those conundrum rare diseases. She is beautiful, fascinating, funny, outgoing, and yet there are all these developmental, intellectual, and learning delays attached to that. And once I got that gift in my life, I knew what my passion was going to be going forward. And that was to speak for those who probably need a really strong vision for moving their lives forward. And so I started Creative Spirit after I met an industry friend, and my daughter was about 9 years old, and he'd met her and said, David Nobe in Australia, he was leading creative for Droga 5, and said, I did this thing in Sydney at Droga 5 called Creative Spirit, and we hired one individual with Down syndrome, and he completely changed the entire tenor of the whole agency. And so instead of advertising being sort of go-go and we're all for ourselves, when Lloyd would come to work every day, this individual with Down syndrome, he would just leaven the atmosphere in a great way. We were all more humble. We were all smarter. We were more inclusive. Our thinking got better, and we just got sharper. You should think about bringing this to the States. And I don't know whether or not I had the foresight then to say, 8 years later, after that conversation with David Nobe at the Andy Awards in Costa Rica, that Creative Spirit was going to turn into the project of my life. But it certainly was a turning point in terms of bringing together a lot of things I've been focused on for a long time, and obviously something that was really, really personal to me. And so in 2017, a group of us got together, David included, who did it long distance from Sydney, and we launched Creative Spirit as the first organization that would employ individuals with intellectual, developmental, and learning disabilities at the best companies in the world in fair wage positions in integrated jobs. And I know that's a mouthful, so I'd love to unpack that for you if you have the patience for that, Laura.
Absolutely. Please go ahead.
All right. So when you think about it, the more research I did around what my daughter's future would be like and other individuals with intellectual disabilities, I learned that the employment rate for those folks was 15%. 15%, not the unemployment rate, but the employment rate was 15%. And of the 15% who are employed, half of them work for free or work well below minimum wage just to have a job. And it just stunned me. It sort of crushed my heart at that very moment that I uncovered what the reality was going to be and what that future looked like. And here I was, my entire life, making money for people, taking companies public, figuring out exactly, how somebody was going to position themselves, what the white space is. I could tell you what the white space is, if you will, and the gap is in the economic reality of those with intellectual and developmental disabilities. It's to get a fair wage job. And so I think that the reason that we so laser focused on this idea of focusing on the companies that I've known so well my entire career is because I know that that's where the jobs are. I know that's where the training is, and I know that's where the money is. And I do think at the end of the day, it's where the heart is.
Yeah, there's so much I can say. One, thank you for doing this, because it's funny. Like the last couple of years, one of our all-time favorite vendors is Spectrum Designs, and they are largely based on Long Island, and they hire 50% of folks who have intellectual disabilities, and 50% who don't. And it is the most incredible place. And I always talk to any of my clients and vendors like, no, this is who we're ordering and buying from, because spend a day and seeing this incredible community that is built with folks who are there, and it is the heart of everything. You just want to stay there and just soak up all the goodness that comes out of working with all the folks who were there. So I completely understand what you're saying. And for me, it was like, of course, like, why wouldn't you want to hire great young people who want a job? And, it's quite fortuitous that we're having this conversation, because I'm not sure if you saw on 60 Minutes last weekend, they had a whole story about young people who have autism who were getting hired at these different jobs, whether it be at Ernst & Young or these technology companies. And people are finally talking about it. I think that's the first thing. It's like, yes, what happens when an intellectually disabled person becomes 18 and wants to get a job? Where are they going to find them? So it's so very important to shine as big a light on this, that this can happen and be great for everyone involved.
I did have an opportunity to see the piece, and it was really exciting to see. I am very enamored of what all of the organizations featured are doing. And one of the things that, has been an enormous aspiration of ours, we have a wonderful board of directors, by the way, really two things. One is expand the conversation to include, but also, to exclude, and also, let me do that again, to include and go beyond those with autism. Because I think that once we can see the notion that those with IDDs or intellectual, developmental, and learning disabilities are ambitious and able and capable and do that myth busting, I think our 85% unemployment number will improve dramatically. I love the focus on autism as a feature, because you have so many twice exceptional folks in that population. There was a gentleman who was featured who is going to change the world because of his focus on science. You've got an enormous opportunity using disability at this moment in time to really shine a light on the social justice issues that have been around for so long, but yet have been not conquered. And so one of the things that Creative Spirit is focused on today is really the intersectionality issue. One of the things that we have not had a great enough impact on in the 75 years since National Disability Employment Awareness Month, or 30 years of ADA, is to really bring to light that women of color, people of color in general, and many other groups are worse off than the 85% unemployed in the disability population. And so, I say this with all, humility. If you think about social justice, the last thing you would want to be on this earth is a woman with a disability who is African American in this country. Your chances of employment are pathetic. I'm
Well, that's the
almost
thing.
zero.
Well, that was the thing that struck me the most about the 60 Minutes piece, because I was like waiting to see a Black girl. Because for me, it's like that's what I want to see, because when we're talking about, and I'll give you like the story about culture boards in a second, that's a thing, like talking about Black women who have some sort of intellectual disability in some way, shape, or form is not talked about. And and we, the statistics are what, Black women are the ones who have it the hardest in this country, no matter what. And when I was watching that 60 Minutes piece, and I was like, okay, there's a white boy, there's a white boy, there's a white girl, there's a Black guy, there's no Black girl. And then when they kind of get to a Black girl, she doesn't speak. And I'm just like, ah. Because I'm like, this is the thing. It's like it's an economic justice conversation, like, and it is a human dignity conversation. Like when I go back to my first job when I worked as a peer counselor, and like, it was girls who were my age who lived 7 minutes from where I lived, and they might as well live on another planet compared to me, because here I am, privileged, upper middle class, going to private school, and every opportunity that I could ever want because of where I'm going to school and what my parents do, versus kids who looked exactly like me, but would have not nearly the same opportunities that I would. And one of the girls who was in the group was also autistic, and she was the loveliest, most amazing, and she was so good at reading people and like telling like, and telling people about themselves in the most delightful but like honest way that they needed to hear. And I remember thinking, like, is she ever going to get a chance to actually use her powers for good, or is that going to be taken in such a way that she's angry or argumentative and not get the opportunities that somebody else would be able to get? And it always stuck with me. And for me, it's always been so integral for everything that I do, to sort of always lift as I climb and think about things from an opportunity and an economic justice side of things. Like, how can I help people get to where they need to go? Because if I can get you into the rooms, if I can get you the gig, you're gonna fly. And I think that's the thing that gets missed a lot in these conversations, where it's like, well, oh, there's all these other folks. I'm like, yeah, but like economic justice for women of color, big problem. That's what you got to pay attention to as well.
I think the work that we're doing at the Advertising Club of New York with the fellowship program and the Women's Masterclass, I want you to come and speak, and I want you to come and be introduced to that program. All the women that we've really sponsored, and we've invested quite a lot of our foundation money in bringing those superstars to Bright. We have 100% retention and upward mobility among that group. And these are professional women who are just kick butt. Some of them have gone off to be entrepreneurs, et cetera. So I would love for you to meet that team of people, because I think this is our 5th class of folks, and they are just doing great stuff. That is something we need to scale. The same way with Creative Spirit, we need to get to scale with what we're doing today. For every 10 applicants that are men or young adult, men, we get 1 girl. And it freaks me out. And it brings me to a place that just makes me scratch my head and say, what is it? It's societal, it's systemic. It's certainly about what parents think. And when you start to get into some of the more ethnically focused conversations, like the one you and I were just having, part of it is we have to start solving the problems that are attached to each of our groups. And I know the confidence among young women, which is something we've started to focus on in the disability community, is just not there the same way it is for boys. The presumption of competence among girls, for girls, is far less than it is for the boys. So that's, just starting place number 1. Number 2, there are other caregiver opportunities that we have for education in the Hispanic community, in the African American community, in new immigrant communities, who come in and think, well, I am not deserving, my kids aren't deserving, my legacy isn't deserving of this next natural place. And nothing could be further from the truth. because particularly for the caregivers, which, is really parents for the most part, but caregivers in general, is that they all care so much. They literally go through their lives and bankrupt their futures and spend their investments and do all of these things to take care of a group of people who are perfectly ambitious and capable of really fending for themselves. And all we have to do is give them the training and the opportunity for a job. And so what we do at Creative Spirit is, we believe in, we have a growth mindset. We believe in positive intent. We know that these large corporations, most of which I've, spent my business career working with, are all very well intentioned. They honestly don't know where to start. We just put a piece of research, what I would call seminal research in the space, into market. And what we're starting to find out is that all these phenomenal, well-intentioned companies, some were, in the 60 Minutes piece this week, just sometimes don't know where to start. And so what we've been doing at Creative Spirit from day one is we offer an opportunity to go in and work very directly with the HR department and the recruitment staff, et cetera, and we do training. And so it's really fantastic that sometimes the CEO will just come in and say, we're going to do this thing. We're going to focus on individuals with disabilities and we're going to hire them. But when that gets passed over to the HR department, the CHRO really needs a practice and needs to know where to start. So we've been focused on training the HR department, working with them hand in glove. And one of our core benefits of working with Creative Spirit is that we provide coaches to the candidates and individuals. We teach them how to get a job, we teach them how to interview, but most important, we want them to retain their jobs. And so what we do is when we go into these corporations, we also offer the same coach to the hiring managers. And our coaches work with both the individual who gets the position and us as the hiring manager in the HR department in perpetuity. We have some really fantastic generous grants that have been provided by companies like the Voyas and the Verizons of the world. And we have this opportunity to make sure that our candidates stick for the long run. And even through COVID, we've had 100% retention of our candidates in the positions.
Phenomenal.
It's really been exciting. My heart stopped for a minute. We did our gala right at the beginning of COVID, March 5th. And I thought, oh my God, the world is coming to an end and everybody's going to be out of their jobs that we worked so hard to put them in. And actually just the opposite is true.
Oh, that's so wonderful to hear. I mean, Laurel, there's so much we can talk about this. Because there's a whole thing with me and like Black women and dyslexia that I'm working on this massive research project. Because I'm like, oh, there's all these correlations.
Let's do it. The one thing I will tell you about Creative Spirit is we have one mantra. The one mantra, we have many passions and one mantra. The mantra is action. And the reason I say that is we have so many people who are out there, I won't say wagging their finger at CEOs saying you have to do this and you have to hire that. And we put people in jobs. And it's really, if you think about disability rights as an example, the rights are in place. They're not perfect, but NDEAM has been in place for 75 years. ADA has been in place after a long struggle, for 30 years. The rights exist to do all these things, but we need some action. So I'll partner up with you any day.
Oh, famous last words.
Okay.
But just because for me, as I said, I'm always about how do I get stuff done, this month, the past summer has been like helping get PPE disproportionate communities, because I'm like, duh, get it done. And then you start picking up the phone and saying, how can I get this done? And then making it happen. And then folks like, how do you do that? It's like, you find the people who can actually get stuff done, and guess what? Tell them, and they'll get stuff done. That's all there is to it. Like, you can't stand on a rooftop and yell that, like, I wish someone would do something, unless you're willing to get your hands dirty. And I think that's, the lesson of it all, where getting into it and having empathy, everything starts with empathy. And then understanding that you're not trying to be a charity case. You're doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And then you can do so much more and make such a meaningful and lasting impact that you have no idea. Looking back on all the things that you've been able to do, what do you think you'd tell the 25-year-old Laurel?
I think I would tell the 25-year-old Laurel that if you really believe in an equitable society, if you have a growth mindset and you really see the good in all and you presume competence all the way around, there's really nothing you can't do. I would say my only focus to my 25-year-old self would be keep your confidence, don't lose sight of what the end game is, and don't worry so much about what other people think along the way. Because the folks who have the same mindset, the presumption of positivity, will gravitate toward you, and ultimately those who don't fall away. And so I would say to my 25-year-old self, keep the faith, follow your focus, and make sure you have the confidence to get there.
That's pretty fantastic advice. It's funny. I was having a conversation with a well-known gentleman in the industry a little while earlier today, and we were having a similar conversation about women and confidence. And he's like, I think, what am I not saying to be like, yes, so you guys speak up first. Don't defer to the dudes. And I think it's so important, especially for women in business, to find your voice and then run with it. What is the thing about you that is the FOMO and that people will completely miss out if they don't have you? Write that stuff down, and then when you get worried, like, look at that stuff and remember that, like, you got this. You wouldn't be in this room, you wouldn't be having this conversation unless you were the exact right person that someone needed right at this moment. So I think it's so key advice.
It's pretty easy. It's pretty easy to, be self-conscious. It's pretty easy to second guess what you're doing all the time. But, once you set a vision for something and you naturally can accumulate the people who are like-minded in a good way, not necessarily creating a division between leaders and followers at all, actually. Just the opposite. I think if you set a vision and people naturally gravitate toward it, you have an obligation to continue to lead, but you must include other people's opinions. And I think that the patience and the time and the notion that, life is long, and you get if you include people along the way that are like-minded, they will ultimately come along as long as they have a stake in it. And I think that's the one thing I learned as my older self, if you will, and that is to have the patience and confidence that ultimately success comes if you're just a little bit patient with it and you give people an opportunity to contribute along the way.
Yeah, thank you for saying patience, because I think a lot of times, especially young people, assume everything should be solved, amazing, and wonderful by the time you are 30 at the stroke of midnight on your birthday. And, and you're like, yeah, that's not the move. Like, the road is long. When I think back to my 30th birthday 10 years ago versus my 40th birthday back in February of this year, I'm like, I have grown so much. It's like I spent 25 years in this decade versus just 10 years in terms of, like, the person I am now, the success I have now versus what I thought I would have at 30. And none of it's what I would have ever predicted. But the thing that kind of remains true, and why it always came through, was the relationships. Like, when you were good to people and you can be patient about things, it'll come. And that's where it all is so key, that the road is just so damn long and it's not easy, but you can get there.
I think that, go ahead, please.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, and think about it, like, when that magic happens, when that connection happens, it's so inspirational. It makes you go 10 times faster, right? The momentum behind you, once you're patient, you make the connection, and it so propels you forward. I always say that my inspiration comes after, it's sort of the reaffirmation phase, when the others sort of contribute to the idea and it becomes something else. And that reaffirmation of the original is the thing that makes your goal happen quicker and the momentum pick up faster and faster.
So very true. And, thinking of momentum picking up faster, and also the momentum of the weirdest year of all time, what are you as Laurel doing for your self-care? Because, like, how are you navigating this insane time?
Holy cow, I know. Wow, work, kids, older parent, the whole 9 yards. It's been a journey. I really do fall back on my yoga and meditation practice. It came to me very late in my life. I practiced with a number of women in the industry, actually. That's really been helpful. I was given a book by one of my industry colleagues called Go In and In a little while ago. It was a book of poetry. And it's about, the practice of yoga and life and nature and union, which is the part I love the most. And that book and that self-care and that moment of inspiration daily for me just takes me back to the place and reminds me that self-care is the only way you can go forward and help others. And so I know it sounds so cliche, but it's really the truth. And for me, meditation, I miss my 45 minutes on Metro North in the morning because I actually got so good at it. I could meditate on Metro North.
You were able to meditate on a train? Wow.
Which is nuts. So I actually find it a little bit harder at home sometimes because there's so many distractions, but it's really been a godsend.
Oh, that's really interesting. Well, I could never meditate on the Long Island Railroad. I just could not focus ever. I couldn't read. I would just have to listen to podcasts and music because I just, congrats on being able to have that center because I know I don't.
But look where it got you. You have this fantastic podcast.
This is the thing because I spend so much time listening to others. I mean, there's so much. So this month is Disability Employment Awareness Month. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. The legacy of NDEAM, I have to keep reminding myself of the acronym over and over again, was it was started by the government, thus the long acronym in the beginning, 75 years ago. And it was really interesting trajectory. And it was started to put men coming back from World War II into productive jobs. And it started out as something that was focused on physical disability. And about 40 years into it, they realized that it shouldn't just focus on, because there was no PTSD hadn't been, sort of identified then. And so 40 years later, intellectual disability was brought into the definition. And what's significant about it is that if you think about it, having a productive life, having a job to go to, having peers, having colleagues in business or in your work life is one of the most important things that you can do as a young adult. I'd like to say before Creative Spirit, a lot of our young adults were graduating to the couch. And that is a really scary place to be for your own mental health, your own physical health. 75% of those with intellectual disabilities are obese because they don't work, et cetera. And so the legacy around National Disability Employment Awareness Month, again, was started, for the military, but has really evolved and I think has become much more of a bellwether for mental illness, those with intellectual disability, and there's been much more focus over the past few years on how we get those folks to work, including, what we're doing at Creative Spirit.
Awesome. And so we'll put all that information in the show notes so people can find out more information and learn more about how they can get involved, because I'm sure lots of people will want to. And last question, even though there's so much more I could talk to you about, do you have a give and or an ask of the audience?
Wow. Let's see. Where do I start? The one ask I would have is I'd love to share back with your audience an opportunity to really get engaged in the conversation. Follow us on social media. We are going to be, Creative Spirit will be ringing the bell at the New York Stock Exchange on October 27th in honor of National Disability Employment Awareness Month and just in honor of our constituency, and that opportunity to be with such fantastic companies who are so supportive. And we'll be doing a virtual event, a webinar, where we will talk about all of these opportunities. We'd love any company that's interested in being involved with Creative Spirit to come to our site and register. It's creativespirit-us.org. And we will, in very short order, get back to you and make sure that we have the opportunity to talk to you about the training that is free to you and the positions and the fabulous candidates. We have candidates that are engineers, receptionists, coders, writers, QA engineers, all ready, willing, and able to have a job.
Phenomenal. We will put all those details in the show notes. So now I figured out when your episode's going to air. so, so it's like it's October 22nd. It is. So
27th.
27th. All right.
Yeah.
So that's when your article is going to go live. Because yeah, I'm a marketer too, after all. But Laurel, oh my gosh, I could just talk to you for hours on end. I just am so deeply honored to have you on the show because the work you're doing is so phenomenal, and it just matters so much and makes such a humongous lifelong impact on people. And just doing right and doing good is just so very important. And the way that you're giving the dignity of work to people just is phenomenal. So thank you so much for sharing your story on the podcast with me. It's been an absolute delight.
Thank you so much, Laura. And thank you for the platform and all the time and the generosity of this moment. I really, really appreciate it.
Awesome. We'll put all the information in the show notes. As I said, definitely follow Laurel and find out how you can get involved with Creative Spirit, because it's just the right thing to do. And that is our show.